co-host Roman.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And we have a guest joining us this morning. Let me tell you a little bit about this gentleman. So a couple of weeks back, we had an event here called Unity in the Community. And prior to the beginning of the festivities, I kind of went around to each of the vendors' tables just to sort of see what was interesting. And this gentleman had some really interesting items that caught my eye. And I said to him, brother, I'm going to go get my wife and I'm going to come back. And when my wife arrived, we went over to his table and we looked, and my wife was just blown away. And she bought one of these puzzles I want to tell you a little bit about. So my brother, Moody, makes these puzzles. And what makes them so interesting is the fact that if you put them together correctly, it will reveal a person or figure from African American history. And also his wife, and I hope you can see him, makes these very intricate tissue boxes. They're wooden and they're so vibrantly decorated. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Moody.
Well, thank you very much, Ron, for having me and your co-host. Essentially, due to the pandemic and the fact that I couldn't get out to photograph, I'm a photographer, and the lockdown, my wife and I invested in a 3D printer. And during the lockdown, I taught myself how to use the printer and how to engrave on wood or acrylic. After I did that, I then started working towards creating a puzzle after researching and finding out that there wasn't any puzzles online that had African symbols built into them. Now, I did the whole Google bit, understood and learned how a puzzle is created, the significance of puzzles, and how they came to be so popular. And of course, during the pandemic, it was something that a lot of people were doing. So with all of that, I decided to use photographs that I had taken, engrave them onto wood or acrylic, and create my own puzzles. Now, of course, anybody in the business understands the Adobe products and what you can do with them. So as a toolkit, I started creating puzzles. I incorporated African symbols, and I used my photographs.
Awesome.
Well, thank you.
They're awesome.
And from there, I started, I guess you would say, incorporating other individuals from the net who were making history or just hitting figures that many of us don't know about, or let me say, don't know too much about. And here I am. I now create puzzles, design puzzles. My wife, on the other hand, she creates decorative boxes, as Ron has stated, using African printed cloth. And she's doing quite well with that. There are several varieties. Excuse me, Ron?
Oh, no, I'm just going to say, well, tell us, how do we get in touch with you? For those who are looking at your puzzles and looking at your wife's work, how do we get in touch with you?
Well, right now, we can be reached at Use for You, either on Instagram or Facebook. Repeat, Side Use for, the number 4, you.
Okay. Because, there are a lot of people who may be watching or listening right now. With the fall now, with us entering the fall season, the holidays are right around the corner. So people might want to, invest in some of these puzzles or other your wife decorative artwork as Christmas gifts for those who are celebrating Christmas. And you have an example of one of the puzzles. So we're going to let our viewers try to figure that out. Because it took me a little bit. You know what I mean? Fortunately, Terry saw right away who it was, and Romane was able to recognize her as well. And that's all I'm going to say is her. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Yes, they are to spark conversation. And I call them mystery puzzles essentially so that you will not get caught up in wanting a picture. Now, of course, many people have dealt with the box sets, and of course, you follow the picture to complete the puzzle. But I think intuitively, we as a people can do things without seeing them.
Right.
And we have done that. It's proven, it's documented. So why not stress that point? Just look at it, or should I say, figure it out.
Right. Right.
Stretch your brain.
That's it. That's it.
That's really what we need to do. But you know, today we wanted to talk about something a little bit different. You know, everybody knows now, or should know, that Queen Elizabeth, the reigning monarch who sat on the throne of the British Empire for over 70 years, passed last Thursday. And I guess as a gesture, we should send our condolences to the family. But now that the Queen has passed, is it time that Africa demand back the antiquities that were taken? Not just the antiquities, but the crown jewels. Because England or Great Britain may have been the greatest benefactor of the suffering of African people. So now I think it's time for us to begin to come together, to unify, to negotiate from a position of strength. We need to put aside our petty differences, because right now in Africa, what's happening is we are fighting for the crumbs that are falling off the table of the British, the French, the Germans, and all the former colonial powers.
Mhm.
It is time for us now to stand up and demand what has been taken from us. And, you know, that process began several years ago with several nations in Africa come together to discuss reparations. And also in this country, you know, reparations has been on the ballot in some of these races in this country. So people are beginning to understand that Africa, potentially the wealthiest continent on the planet, has some of the poorest people. While the former colonial powers have been feasting off the African continent for centuries now.
Mhm.
So when I mention the English, and I say they are the greatest benefactors, if you think about it, so many people have gone to school on the Rhodes Scholarship. But how many of us know the history behind the Rhodes Scholarship? Are you familiar with the history of the Rhodes Scholarship?
No.
I would say I have heard a
No,
little
not at all.
bit concerning that he was a Briton or Englishman who went to Africa essentially and literally excavated the land for diamonds.
Well, it's a little bit more detailed than that. Cecil Rhodes was, yes, an Englishman who went to Africa in the 19th century, and seeing Africa's potential wealth in terms of diamonds, because during that time, diamonds had very little value to the African people. We would play with them. But when Cecil Rhodes and his band came to Africa, they saw these diamonds and recognized there was a market for them. So he and another gentleman by the name of Barnett Isaacs, I believe, they came to Africa, killed so many Africans that they changed the name of the country to Rhodesia.
Mm.
He named it Africa after himself. And he and his partner, Barrett Isaacs, founded a company called De Beers. And they produced some of the world's, are probably the largest producers of the world's diamonds, and probably the wealthiest company or producer of diamonds. They also went further into Southern Africa and they took over the gold mines. So for Cecil Rhodes, he wanted to expand the power and the influence of the British crown. There's a picture of him standing with one foot on Europe and the other foot on Africa and his hand stretched out as a symbol of the power and the influence that the British had over the world. If you think about it, there was a time when the sun never set on the British Empire. They had holdings here in America, Africa, Asia, pretty much everywhere.
Oh yes, they colonized, for what I understand, India.
Yes.
Oh man, well of course Africa, and Barbados was their claim to fame. That's where they created what is known as PAC concerning Africans. It was a company that they created,
Mm-hmm.
and essentially their business were Africans.
Right.
And Black Diamonds became, as you stated, what De Beers was actually selling.
Mm-hmm. And they made, and they're still making, trillions of dollars in the years that they've controlled the diamond trade. So for the Africans, and I think it was in the 1950s that the De Beers company contracted with an advertising agency, and they came up with the slogan, "A diamond is a girl's best friend."
Mm.
And since that time, every woman wants that man to put a ring on it with a substantial rock.
Mm.
We never begin to think about the suffering of the people who had to go down into these mines without any sort of proper equipment and work day and night to create wealth for the British.
Mm-hmm.
And even to this day, Africans are working in diamond mines, some of them subjected to multiple x-rays just to ensure that they do not have a diamond secreted in their bodies, in a body cavity somewhere.
Mm.
So here you are on the African continent, the home of the African people. You come in, you kill scores of them, take control of their resources, and then you're told by the colonizer, you're not entitled to have any of this. This is all ours.
I think what I read, and I didn't have a chance to do a lot of reading, but I think what I read was that at the height of their ruling, 1 out of 5 people in the world was subject to the British monarchy.
Absolutely.
In addition to that, I read something about Kenya, and I was floored with tea and coffee,
Mm-hmm.
and how this was the part where other people need to hear this, like the Jews need to hear this, that they created what is really concentration camps where they caged in different villages and colonies to keep them in, and they starved them.
Mm-hmm.
They used all kinds of tactics so that they would, what was the name of their army? It wasn't just Kenya, it was different parts of Africa, but I think it's called the Mau Mau.
The Mau Mau War in Kenya, yes, that's correct.
And they did that so that they would get them to relinquish war, because they evoked war against the British, and we probably could have won. So it's a lot. It's a lot.
It really is.
It's
And
a lot.
you have to keep in mind that there are a number of colonial powers that feasted on not just Africa, but all of the planet. Wherever they went first as students and observers, then as military powers, and lastly as missionaries.
Are we talking about the English, or are we talking about Britain?
We're talking about, well, I guess they're interchangeable,
Mhm.
because the British or the English were able to defeat all of their colonial rivals, and they emerged as probably the major power in Europe after the fall of the Greeks and the Romans, right? And the Roman Catholic Church. England emerged probably around maybe the 15th, 16th century as the preeminent power in Europe. So most of the resources taken out of Africa found their way into the coffers of the royal family of England.
Yes, spoils of war.
Right.
Spoils the war. Yes.
And I'll tell you something, we could not even estimate the wealth that they have accumulated or acquired from just their holdings in Africa. And the European power, the colonialists, could not have existed had it not been for Africa, for Asia, and even for the Americas. Because realistically, in terms of resources, Europe doesn't have any. They exhausted theirs very early on. They really didn't have much in the way of gold, diamonds. What they had during that time was wood, and they used that for fire and building materials. But what they did have was the ability that they learned from Africa to make advanced weaponry. And they came to Africa with that advanced weaponry, and they were able to subdue our armies. And after we were subdued, then they sent in the missionaries. And they told us that we should serve our master.
Yeah, the head game.
Yes. They told us that, look, we will come and we will build churches here. Our missionaries will come and teach you the right way. We will change your name to good Christian names. And what we will do is, as we extract the wealth from your country, we will give you the belief that one day you will go to heaven, that our God will lift you up into the sky, and you will receive your just reward. We're going to have ours now, but you one day will get yours after you're dead. But it's okay, because your spirit will be alive, enjoying a feast with the master.
Well, essentially, the word religion just means just that, brainwashing. And, and the more you understand it, you can see why they would want to brainwash individuals simply to work for them.
Right.
And to make that process a little easier. Now, come on, based on history, you know, there was Muslims as well.
Right.
And Muslims were the ones that clearly saw it for what it was and were the agitators.
Mm-hmm.
And they were the ones that was disruptors. It's always through a way of persuasion, using the term religion once again, that will get things done for someone else.
Right.
They, the individual, will never benefit.
Right.
Very seldom.
And you know something, we do it with gladness, right? We rejoice in the fact that we are producing, not for ourselves, for someone else, but we have the belief that one day we're going to go home somewhere beyond the clouds, right? And we will live forever with Jesus.
It's a thorough practice.
It is. Now, one day, and I don't want to get too much into it today, we need to talk about this concept, this idea of Jesus. Where did it come from? So let me just throw this out there, and we'll talk about this more in depth at another time. But historically, in 325 AD, Constantine called all of Christianity together in Turkey in a place called Nicaea, and they had the first council of Nicaea. And what they did was they created the idea of Jesus based on Kemetic or African traditions. They created this concept of God who would look like them. Prior to that, there was nothing
Deities.
that existed. There were no deities that were considered, that were European. The idea of whiteness didn't come to about the 16th century in this country and around the world. But there were no European, symbols, religious symbols. And even to this day, one of the most revered symbols of religion is Our Lady of Czestochowa in Poland, also known as the Black Madonna, where pilgrims go every year to worship at the feet of the Black Madonna.
Yes.
So we're going to just leave that for now, and we'll revisit that at another time. But I mean, in terms of what's happening right now with the death of the Queen of England, should we, as African people, demand that they return the crown jewels?
Yes, and I think Kenya has already made a motion
Mhm.
to the British Empire demanding that they give back the diamonds.
Mhm.
I think it's one diamond in particular that they're referencing and
Wow.
saying that they stole the diamond and they
Mhm.
want it back.
Mhm.
So, and now here's the other part. Just us taking the time that when we interface with people, that we kind of like educate them.
Mhm.
Because I saw African American people on Instagram crying and carrying on
Mhm.
about the Queen died,
No.
and I
No, you
just
didn't.
what I
No, you
mean
didn't.
crying. They was crying the Queen,
Boo-hooing,
the
huh?
Queen, boo-hooing, and
Were they British?
no, they were
Wow.
not. So it just speaks to what you said about the brainwashing, and I think that the religion and everything, it was just created and for us so that they could dismantle resistance.
Mhm.
I
Absolutely.
think it's just about us resisting
Mhm.
whatever they say, because I don't think it's just about getting us to work, but it's getting us to not resist whatever they organize and structure.
Mhm.
Whenever you tell a fairy
Yeah,
tale,
yes,
you're going to get
yes,
cooperation.
yes.
And this is what makes the death of Queen Elizabeth II such a spectacular thing to watch, and as you just described, feel sorry about.
Mm,
It's a fairy tale that it's finally ended.
mhm,
Absolutely.
She's the longest reigning monarch,
mhm,
70 years.
Mhm.
Understand that.
Right.
We also understand that in the family, she married her third cousin.
Right.
All right.
mm,
They have a practice of doing that.
Mhm.
It's nothing new. It's nothing to be ashamed about. It's what they do. And essentially, it was to keep that bloodline and keep all of those riches within that family.
Well, for people that do not know this, all of the royal families of Europe are related. All of them are intermarried. The ruling class in this country is also related to the royals of Europe. The Bush family was related to Princess Diana. Make no mistake, power has been consolidated in a group of families,
wow.
and that is how they
Wow.
maintain that power. In fact, I believe the Queen was of the House of Windsor,
Yes.
right?
Yes,
Okay.
she is.
Well, that's not who they originally were. Prior to World War II, they were under the original name, the House of Gotha. So when World War II began, they didn't want to seem as if they were siding with the Germans. So all of a sudden they changed to the House of Windsor.
Mm.
And that was a PR move.
Yes, it was. And it's been that way ever since. So we think of the House of Windsor, no, but these were Germans.
Absolutely.
Well, can you just say it again so everybody hears the piece that you gave them about the Bushes and how the power was consolidated?
Yeah. These people that the blue bloods, and it's not just the Bush, we're talking, yes, the Bush family, the Rockefellers, the Bronfmans. These folks came here supposedly seeking religious freedom. No, they came here seeking opportunity.
Mhm.
And they are all related to the royal families of Europe. All of them have intermarried, and they would do that to end the wars and the conflicts amongst them. So if you had a daughter, she'd be married off to someone's son. And usually there is a familial connection, a cousin, usually. And
Some incest.
well, yeah. Well, yes.
Say that.
Okay, well, it's incestuous.
Yeah.
Right,
I just
I mean-
want to make sure you say
No,
that.
no, it's incestuous.
That's
But
how
we
you
have
make-
to say that
That's how you
because,
maintain a bloodline.
because
Right.
if we don't say that,
Mhm.
then people will find a way to evade that.
Okay.
So we have to say that.
Okay,
They didn't
so
like Megan because Megan is
she's not part of their
biracial.
bloodline.
Right, but and she's biracial,
Mhm.
right? So she's black.
Mhm.
But incest was okay. So we have to. I just wanted to mention that because that's a frame of thinking.
Mhm.
This is how they think. That's okay.
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I said.
Well, if we're going to go down that line, let me just throw this out there. There is a disease that only Eastern European Jews get called Tay-Sachs disease. And that is from a direct result of incestuous relationships. And only they get it.
Mm.
But
Is
anyway.
is that the disease that actually defigures them
Yeah, yes,
after a while?
yes. And if you look it up, Tay-Sachs, it'll tell you that this is only Eastern European Jews. But anyway, yes, the royal families of Europe, yes, they have an American subset here in this country. And they came here rich and they remain wealthy and powerful to this day. So if you ask yourself, where did the Bush family get their money? Where did Rockefeller get his money? Right? How did America become the preeminent power that it is? And if you do the research, it all goes back to Africa and off the backs of African people. And I should also say, in fairness, brown people as well. Because the first people the Europeans exploited were the native indigenous peoples of these lands. And when they started dying out, they said we need to find a hardier, sturdier people who can do the hard labor. So they went to the Pope of Rome, Pope Alexander VI, and said, well, Pope, is it okay for us to reduce Africans to servitude? And he said, well, if they are not Christians, then it is not unchristian-like to do so. Didn't matter that these were human beings. Didn't matter that we're all God's children. If you did not serve or believe as a Catholic, and we're not part of the Catholic faith, then yes, you can reduce these people to servitude.
Well, it was Britain who in the early 15th century created RAC, Royal African Company. I quoted the letters incorrectly. And essentially they had and created a monopoly of slaves from Africa.
Well, what they did was, now you have to keep in mind that the colonial powers were constantly fighting each other for control of Africa and these very valuable trade routes. So they fought each other for years, right? I mean, like England and France fought the 100 Years' War, which actually lasted 106 years. But they constantly fought for control of Africa, parts of Asia, and also the Americas. Because again, Europe has very little in terms of resources. But for the British, they were relentless. You know, like for us, sometimes we get disgusted, we just give up. The British were not about to give up. They were ruthless people and they were relentless. They had an idea and they were going to pursue it to the end. And they became the preeminent power in Europe, probably beginning in the 15th century, right?
Yes.
They eclipsed. Now, in terms of the slave trade, it began really with the Portuguese. They began to trade with the Africans. They called it, they referred to Africa, all of it is Guinea. So they began coming down the coast of Africa and they began to trade with the African countries along the west coast of Africa. Well, and I would urge all of you who are listening and watching, make sure that you get out to the theater to see The Woman King, because some of this is documented in the movie. Take your children, take your grandchildren, because you need to see Africa when we resisted the colonists, or colonialism. So anyway, in this movie, The Woman King, there is interaction between the Dahomey Empire and the Portuguese. It is very important that we understand the relationship. The Portuguese were the first to come down the coast of Guinea. And about 1481, the king of Portugal, I can't think of his name right now, he had the military superiority. And he demanded that the king of Ghana surrender land so that he might build a fortress. Well, about 1481, they started construction on something that would be called Almena Castle, the largest slave fortification in Africa. They knew what they were going to do. So within years, they began to capture Africans, enslave them in Almena Castle, and begin to export them around the world. And one other thing I'd like to mention, sailing with the Portuguese during that time was a very, ambitious fellow by the name of Cristobal Colon, who today we call Christopher Columbus. But he first sailed with the Portuguese, so he had an understanding of sailing and an understanding of Africa and African people. So with that, they began to colonize. And when the other European powers saw the wealth that they were accumulating, the race was on. And for centuries, there has been this fight to control Africa and African people. And even today, we now have entered the fray because there are now Black companies that are mining the diamonds, Black companies that are, getting the gold, right? Of course, when we do it, they call them blood diamonds.
Yes.
Right.
Gotcha.
Right. They change the narrative for us.
All right.
But now the race is for things like strategic metals. Most of the cell phone technology comes from Africa. So the idea is to keep Africa colonized, to keep us fighting amongst ourselves while they reap the benefits. And I was talking to somebody a couple of weeks back. When I was in Spain, I was sitting with some people from South Africa. And they were talking about how, in South Africa, you have the ANC, and I forget who the other political group is, and how they fight amongst themselves. And I said, well, my brother, that's no different from the Bloods and the Crips. We have it in America too, right? We have people who live next door to one another, but one has a red bandana and one has a blue, and they kill each other. And, for a country like South Africa, which is materially wealthy, but the people are poor.
Has always been.
Where do you get the money to buy an AK-47? How do we find them in South Central and in Brooklyn, right? These weapons are manufactured in Russia or in China. We don't have the ships or the planes to bring them here. So how we get them? So I think that we have been so thoroughly indoctrinated that we are afraid to turn the gun on our enemies, but we'll turn it on ourselves.
And again, he said, created to brainwash.
Yes.
And the brainwashing is to dismantle resistance.
And it works.
It absolutely is. It is working to the tune of, we have a whole generation here now who are oblivious to any of this with their history. And they are committing genocide against their own people.
Absolutely.
It's scary. It's scary.
And what bothers me is, well, there's a lot of things that bother me, but at the top of the list is the fact that when something happens to one of us, it essentially happens to all of us. And what happens is we got so many churches that want to say, let's pray. You can't pray your way out of slavery. You cannot pray your way out of mental slavery. You have to take action. I think there's a scripture that says faith without works is dead. So yes, you have the faith, but where are the works? Where are you building wealth for your community? Where are you educating your children? And that brings me back to my point of the warrior king. You need to make sure your children see this movie, particularly young Black girls. You need to see the power of African women, how relentless they were in pursuing protection of their people and ending the slave trade, and how they fought and beat Europeans and ran them off the continent of Africa. Dahomey was defended by the well, they call them the Dahomey female warriors, but I believe it's the Agoji. For years, they kept the Portuguese at bay, and these were just sisters. Yes, there was a male component, but these women, their role was to protect the king, and they did it at the cost of their lives. And I mean, to become part of the Agoji, you made a blood pledge that you would never marry, never have children, never even have sex. That your whole life would be the protection of the king.
And this is historically documented?
This is historically documented. It is.
You're going to make me go to the movies.
You need to go.
I was supposed to go last
yesterday.
night. Yeah, I was supposed to go last night.
But
what
you fell
happened?
asleep.
I was tired.
Right,
I was like, okay, I'm tired. I'm not doing it.
Yeah, well, I went yesterday. I said I'm going on day one, and I'm going to go back again because you have a tendency to miss things.
Yes, of course.
So we need to give it up to Sister Viola Davis and all of the cast and crew members of this amazing film.
Wow.
This is one of the most important things coming out of Hollywood in years.
Wow.
And of course, this is something that Viola Davis and her husband put together. Because of course, Hollywood is resistant. Because they told her that nobody's going to go see a movie about Black women.
So they actually financed the movie?
I believe, yes, her and her husband, and I guess they have some other investors, financed this movie.
Who actually produced it?
She's one of the producers.
Great.
And, you know, while we're on this subject, right, there was a movie that came out called Red Tails. You remember that?
Was it about the
I think so.
Black
The
pilots?
Tuskegee Airmen.
Yes.
That movie was produced by George Lucas of Star Wars fame.
Yes.
Do you know Hollywood would not bankroll that movie? George Lucas financed that movie himself because Hollywood was not interested in showing Black men achieving and being the heroes in World War II. So George Lucas had to put out the money out of his own pocket to produce Red Tails.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's one bit. That's something that got by me. I remember the movie. It was a fantastic movie.
It was. Right. But when you show us fighting against enemies that don't look like us, you really don't want to put that out on the big screen. Because maybe, like all movies, there are subliminal suggestions that are made. And maybe something in your mind would snap and wake up, and you begin to realize, what am I fighting this dude for? What has he done to me?
That's where I heard the term triple nickels,
Mm-hmm.
because they were preceding Tuskegee.
Mm-hmm.
There was a unit,
Right,
triple nickels.
right. Well, you know, we, throughout history, have fought valiantly for this country.
Yes.
Now, you're from Harlem, right?
Yes.
And so are you. So you know about the Harlem Hellfighters,
That's
right? The World War II unit that was
Yes.
kicking butt in France,
That's right.
right? So we've always been, you know, very patriotic for this country and laid our lives down. But what have we gotten in exchange, you know, for the Tuskegee Airmen and also the Harlem Hellfighters? When they came back, they had to deal with Jim Crow. They had to deal with segregation. They had to deal with lynching. A lot of these brothers did not come back to this country.
Oh no.
They remained in Europe,
That's
where
right.
they had a level of freedom that they could never imagine in this country. You know, so now it is time for us to wake up, and we cannot go, because well, you and I were talking on the way here, and you know, Frederick Douglass says, power without a demand concedes nothing. So realistically, we have to go demanding. We can't go begging and pleading with our head down. You know, boss.
And hands out.
Right. You know, boss, it's been a long time that y'all had them diamonds. I'm hoping y'all can give some of us back to us. No. We need to go there, look them in the eye and say, we want back what you've stolen. I've been to Europe on a couple of occasions, and I went to France, to the Louvre. And the Louvre has just section after section dedicated to Africa and what they've taken, particularly out of Kemet or Egypt.
Whoa.
I can show you some of the pictures. I took literally hundreds of pictures, and I couldn't even scratch the surface of all the stuff that they have in the Louvre that they've taken from Africa. In fact, the entrance to the Louvre is a glass pyramid. Yes. Certain cities are laid out to the exact measurements of Kemet.
Wow.
One of them is Paris. The original name of Paris was Isis, which we know is one of the Egyptian goddesses,
Yes.
right? And so is Washington, D.C.
Oh, yes.
So, we need to just get this information out there because we need to go and we need to, the Queen, God rest her soul, I guess, right?
Only being respectful.
Right. But now you've enjoyed it. And actually, she sat on the throne, I believe, for more than 70 years, about 76. I think she got on this throne in 46 or so? Somewhere around there?
I think she was about 17 or 18.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think
she was
24.
No,
I
I
think she was
think that
19.
year you said is
46, right?
Yeah.
I think it was 46 that she sat on the throne for the first time.
Mhm.
So for 76 years, you have enjoyed, the wealth you've acquired off the backs of Africans. And what the
And
royal,
smiled and waved about
that's
it.
what they would do. They would come to Africa, come to the Caribbean, and they would wave and smile and shake a few hands. I seen Harry dancing with some people in one of the African countries. Oh, that's nice. Well, that's wonderful. But that's not going to feed the hungry bellies in Africa. That's not going to provide the education for people who are dying to get educated.
It was the PR after World War II that they had to incorporate. Because as you stated earlier, they changed their background
Mm-hmm.
from German to British
Mm-hmm.
to Britain.
Mhm.
And then they had to also change their image.
Mm-hmm.
So the PR blitz came in, and the waving
Mm-hmm.
is just that. They
Right.
say, look, we're here, we're floating by, we're acknowledging you
Mhm.
because we still want you to work with us.
Mhm.
All right, because of course, those who were commenters did not like those who were in power.
Mm-hmm.
That's just clear. It's obvious. They had to find a way to make that connection. The PR is so good that even today, they get tax-free monies from these individuals up to the count of $107 million.
Mm-hmm.
That's tax-free,
Mm-hmm.
as well as owning castles themselves.
Mhm.
It has been found out in
Many of them.
2017. That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
In 2017, that the Queen had a little stash that they discovered.
Mm-hmm.
So you really don't know how much they are worth.
Right.
They're stating now, a little brief bit that I read, that it's going to cost $7.5 million to govern this funeral.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that something?
I'll tell you something, right? If we're going to make a demand, we need to do it quickly. Because if you think about it, England, France, Germany, the Netherlands, the Spanish, the Portuguese, and I don't know if I included the Germans.
All monarchs.
Well,
Still
they
have
were the
monarchs.
primary colonists, right? They are the ones who went to Africa and went crazy, raping this continent. But right now, they're broke.
Mhm.
In what sense?
They are, just like in this country, we're broke. Europe is broke as well. I was just in Europe, and I saw on the BBC World News where a woman in Europe, or in England rather, said she gets 15 pounds a month in food assistance. And she's thankful for that. What happened to all of the money? What happened to all of the material wealth that was taken out of Africa? Where is it? This country is trillions of dollars in debt. How did that happen? America benefited greatly off the backs of Africans. Wall Street was built off of Africans. In fact, Wall Street is called Wall Street because there was a wall around it. It was an open air slave market.
That's right.
Where's the money? Where is it? How do we get trillions of dollars in debt when we print our own money? Something's not adding up. For the British, what did they just do a couple of years ago? Brexit. Why? Because the European economies are faltering. They were tired of bailing out countries like Greece and others. They wanted the British to devalue the strength of the pound. British said, no, we'll break away. So these countries are broke. So eventually, will they have to sell the crown jewels?
We're waiting.
Right. So we need to start now demanding, hey, wait a minute, before you get broke and want to sell, give us our stuff back. Now, there are a lot of countries that are giving back antiquities and they have ceremonial value, but we want them diamonds. We want that gold. Just think about it. So an ounce of gold is what, maybe $2,000, right? Give or take.
Telling me something.
What does a sarcophagus weigh? Hundreds of pounds. So if you just have, say, the sarcophagus of King Tut, how much potential wealth do you have? And they got it in Europe. They have several sarcophagi in Europe. That's what they're sitting on.
Well, kudos to Kenya, because it looks like they are, in fact, they may be, unless there's some other ones I don't know about, they actually made the move and said, we want our stuff back.
Right.
So kudos to Kenya.
Right.
That's a big deal.
It's a huge deal. And hopefully there'll be a ripple effect across Africa, right? Where that African countries will follow the lead of Kenya and begin to make the demand, hey, give us back what you have taken. We're not asking for any more. We're just asking for what you took from us. Because anytime we take things from them, don't they demand it? Be late with your cell phone bill or be late with a credit card bill. They're tacking on interest and fees and everything else. And, like last we were talking about the colleges in this country and education and how just like the colonial powers, a lot of these colleges and universities, their endowment came from slavery. But then they want to charge you your child $80,000 a year to attend a college that their ancestors built. How do you do that?
You're so right.
And then they tell us, well, you're getting a quality education. Well, the Rhodes Scholarship, people like Bill Clinton, Bill Bradley, they went on this endowment established by Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes, we know, killed so many people, he named the country Rhodesia. So eventually, I think in the 70s, Rhodesia was able to get independence. So now we call that country Zimbabwe. But in Zimbabwe, people don't think about it, but Zimbabwe, ancient Zimbabwe, was an incredible civilization, an incredible empire. That's what Cecil Rhodes saw when he got there. He saw there is a wall in Zimbabwe that rivals the Great Wall of China. That is the ingenuity of the people that were in Zimbabwe. So when he got there and saw the diamonds and saw these people with their ingenuity and their intelligence, I got to get this. So, and you have to understand that for these so-called explorers, they all got money from the crown in order to finance expeditions. Well, you got to pay that money back with interest. So when they come there, they are ruthless. I didn't include the Belgians because the Belgians, for them, it was rubber. They came to Africa and they acquired the rubber and had a stranglehold on the rubber industry. And if you were not producing enough rubber, they would cut off a limb, typically a hand. But we have reached that time, and an hour goes by so quickly.
Yeah.
And
it's just a couple of announcements.
I know you have to make a couple more. Please go ahead.
Just a couple. So, just first and foremost, I hope everybody's okay with it. I don't know. I had a death in my family.
I remember. Sorry, I'm sorry about
Yeah,
that.
thank you. And so I thank you. I just want to acknowledge my cousin, Sean Fletcher, great athlete, veteran, Navy veteran, Olympic boxer. He boxed for the Navy.
Ashe.
Yes, federal law enforcement. We just going to hope you rest in power. I love you. The second thing is that we are closely approaching the coming out of the darkness, Greater Lehigh Valley suicide and suicide walk on October 2nd. And please go on my page. Actually doing pretty good with the fundraising, but not quite at my goal for sponsorship. So what happens is you go onto my page, you click on a link, the money goes directly to the National Suicide Prevention organization. And then in turn, what you're doing is you're sponsoring me when I walk. And so I walk every year, and know that the money is, how people say good ground, it's good ground that you're giving into. This is the way that they fund crisis suicide lines. This is how they pay to keep these lines nationally going 24 hours a day. This is an important work. And again, I'm going to say it just like I said it last week, and people will be mad, but you give your money freely, as the basket goes around in the church with no accountability for the money whatsoever. Right? And you giving it for people like, what's his name in Brooklyn?
Oh, yeah, Bishop Whitehead.
Bishop Whitehead.
Yeah.
Okay. For his closet, his prayer closet
His
with
prayer
the
closet.
Gucci suits.
Right.
And
his Rolls Royce.
But trying to get you to give into something that is needed and something that benefits everyone, because mental health has no color, it has no gender. It is something that infiltrates and affects everyone, every family in this world. We know somebody, or maybe even us, but if it's not us, we know somebody who struggles with depression and who has looked at life and considered it hopeless, or feel like in a feeling of despair. So this is a good cause. Go on to the Real Romane page. You could even go on to my own page, my personal page, Romane Lashley. You can go on that page, or you can go on the Real Romane page, click on the link, give to the cause. Like I said, we made great strides toward my goal, but we're still not there. And then if you are willing, come out on the 2nd. Inbox me on Facebook. I'll give you all the particulars. You could be on my team, and we can go and we could do this walk together to show people who struggle with suicidal ideations that they're not alone and that people care. And then lastly, I just want to throw a name out there to you, and I want you to remember this name and be on the lookout for it. Project 33.
Yes.
I'm not going to get into any particulars, just I'm going to say to you, Project 33, stay tuned.
Right.
That's it.
And
well,
may I?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you both for having me here today. I would like to thank the audience. And let me once again mention side U's, the number 4, and the letter U. Side U's for you. Creative tissue boxes.
I already got my eye on this one.
Well, thank you for that. And African-inspired puzzles, including African symbols within the puzzles. Again, let's stimulate. I mean, we sit down, we do puzzles anyway. Let's have a moment where we can actually teach, because one generation may know the individual in the picture, or another elder person may simply say, I know that person. Still, the question is, who is this person?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So reach out to Brother Moody. If you recognize that person, reach out to Brother Moody. And, this artwork is incredible. Check it out. Check the brother out. Check his wife out. And let's support one another.
That's the key.
Lastly, I want to thank you for coming, Brother Moody. I know,
Thank you.
Had asked about it and, took us a little while, but thank you for coming.
Hope to be back.
And, we got into a little bit about the warrior women of Dahomey or the Ogoji. Maybe next week we should talk a little bit more about that because we need to empower our sisters. And for these young girls, you need to get to this movie. Instead of going to the mall to buy a new bag or some new shoes, get to the movie and understand the power of these women. So with that,
I'm going to take my niece today.
Please do.
Yeah.
And with that, we want to thank you all for listening. Continue to support Ron and Romane, Gynesis Radio, and all the programming on this station.
Peace.
So y'all have a good weekend.
Peace.
Thanks again.
That's right.
Peace.
Ashe.
All righty.